morning, everyone, and welcome to day 7 of the Outsource to LAC Virtual Week 2020. We made it all the way to day 7, and we're thrilled to have you with us. As you know, for the past 9 years, Outsource to LAC has offered a space for technology service companies from across Latin America and the Caribbean to network, to explore business opportunities through our matchmaking system, and to learn about the latest trends in technology directly from the companies who are pushing the envelope in their respective areas. Over the last years and days, we've had the fantastic sessions featuring topics that range from AR/VR to entrepreneurship, e-commerce, video games, animation, automation. We had a fantastic session about marketing yesterday that we invite you to check out at O2LACvirtual.com in case you may have missed them. Today's session will be conducted entirely in English. Esta sesión será en inglés, así que los invitamos a utilizar el botón de interpretación simultánea que encontrarán en la parte de abajo de la ventana. Lastly, we invite you to share your questions for today's presenters on the chat. The team will be reviewing them and we will share a couple before the session ends. As you know, today's session is titled Global Agri Supply Chains, Ag and Food Tech Solution Post-COVID19. And today we are joined by an outstanding panel that is my pleasure to introduce. Allow me to begin with Daniela Candel, Senior Director in Operation Bridges at the Startup Nation Central in Israel. Oskar Chemerinsky, former Director of the IFC Global Agribusiness. Shmuel Rausnitz, Israeli Agri-Tech Sector Analyst at Startup Nation Central in Israel. Camila Petignat, Principal at the Yield Lab Latam in Argentina. Simon Winter, Executive Director at the Syngenta Foundation for Sustainable Agriculture in the United States, and Esteban Cibaja, Head Agronomist at Farm Agro in Costa Rica. Daniela, welcome back. We're thrilled to have you with us again. You have the floor.
Thank you so much, Itzel. So welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. This session will be focused on the agriculture opportunities and challenges that we're seeing. But to set the stage, I'm going to invite Oskar Chemerinsky to start us off. Give us a little bit of context for the discussion we will have right after. Oskar, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Giselle. Thank you, Daniela. I don't know if the presentation, can you see the presentation? Okay, so thank you very much again. So I just wanted to share just some reflections on the crisis and on the impact on the sector, as Daniela said, to set up the stage. So first of all, on the first slide, if we move to the next slide. So why is this recession different from all other recessions? No, and so we look at the speed of the recession, not just the speed of the infection, not the speed of the disease, but the speed at which the recession has spread out. You look at the severity of it, so GDP decreasing by 10% in a quarter throughout the world. I mean, I was looking at the numbers a few days ago, Singapore announcing that the economy contracted an unprecedented 40% on a quarter. So the numbers are just staggering. We have never seen something like that happening so quickly and such a severe recession. And finally, so the global reach of it. So I don't think any place in the planet has been spared. Even places where may have not had the impact of the health crisis still seriously affected by the economic impact of the pandemic. So finally, there is an enormously sort of disproportionate impact on some of the selected sectors and travel, airlines, and we'll talk a little bit more in a minute, so which are triggering changes in consumer behavior and in consumption patterns. So we move to the next slide on the recovery scenarios. No, we have experience with recessions. So some people say they're necessary, it's necessary to take care of excesses such as bubbles, inflationary pressure, bad practices. We had recessions linked to health issues, but not pandemic like this one, like we had the SARS or MERS or swine flu, but they were all followed by rapid recoveries. So we wonder what would be the format of this recovery to which we will be seeing a recovery. So some people are talking about the U-shape, some people are talking about an L-shaped recovery. So it would be a long a recession and then followed by a long period where economic activity, we don't see an economic activity restarting, a V-shape, which is what we all hope. So a quick down, what we are seeing now, quick decrease in economic activity, followed hopefully but by a quick return to pre-economic activity. Some people are talking about this Nike. I don't know if you're familiar with the Nike logo. So you have economic activity going down, and then a slow recovery from from this particular recession. So again, what pattern will this recession follow? I mean, we're seeing we're not yet seeing peak pandemic in some of the emerging economies. We're seeing second waves, so-called second waves or third waves. So some people are talking now about a W type of recovery, where we have a recovery, then we have once again falling an economic recession, economic activity falling down. So again, we don't know yet what the recovery may look like, but I think we're going to see permanent change. One way or another, we're going to see permanent changes in consumer behavior, and many of the changes we're seeing now are irreversible. So if we move to the next slide, winners and losers I mentioned earlier. So the crisis is having disproportionate impact on some industries. Again, to be clear, everyone has been affected, and again, it sounds a little bit out of place or immoral to talk about winners in this type of scenario, but just mention it in relative terms. So among the losers, you have the Eureka sector, so the hospitality, restaurants, cafe, catering. Some people are calling this the beach. So the bookings, like booking platforms like, I don't know, Airbnb or Expedia, the entertainment, the A for airlines, the C for cruises, hotels, so be it, the sharing economy. So whether it's sharing space or the Ubers or sharing transport. So those are clearly some of the losers out of this pandemic, and some of the winners. And again, with the caveat I mentioned yesterday, what a winner means. So all the digital platforms, whether it's telemedicine, whether it's e-services, e-commerce. I mean, some local traveler within the tourism sector, local travel is benefiting to the extent that people are staying closer to home, and then the home cooking, which has an impact on our sector. Home entertainment, the Netflix of this world. So again, there's some losers and some winners. What we're starting to see when we realize that, I mean, the recession is just 3 or 4 months old. We are seeing winners and losers, and I think some of the changes will be reversible. So if we move to the next slide. So the food consumption is resilient. So what impacts are we seeing in our sector, in the agri-food sector? So look at the volumes, and the value of aggregate consumption has not suffered much, but consumer patterns are the one that have changed. And what are we seeing so far? Seeing that more food being bought at the retail level versus eating in restaurants, hotels, bars, or cruises. So again, on aggregate, perhaps similar amount of food, but then in different formats. Within the retail sector, seeing is possible that bigger will get bigger. So consumers may prefer the larger formats because it's easier to maintain the social distancing. Retailers may prefer to deal with big suppliers as opposed to some of the smaller suppliers, just because there's a little bit more, the bigger suppliers may be better able to navigate the new challenges of managing supply chains during a pandemic. We're also seeing switch to healthier food options, more vegetables, more fruit, more fresh options. Everything associated with health benefits basically sells today. At the same point, we're seeing many possible pain points, but it's important to mention also that the sector is resilient, and it has not been impacted in a major way. So transportation, while air cargo has suffered, has not been major disruptions in ocean cargo, in road transport, and a lot of it has to do with government trying to make sure that there's food availability. So we haven't seen an increase in logistics costs. So no major disruption in supply chain so far. But I think it's important to mention and to keep in mind that there is a very high concentration in many of the large commodities. If you look at soybeans, 4 countries or 5 countries represent 70% of the soybeans traded in the world. Same for palm oil. Malaysia and Indonesia represent 75% of all the palm traded in the world. See, same for wheat, for rice, you have India, Thailand, Vietnam, USA, 70% of the trade is rice. So again, a large concentration in relatively few countries, which is a risk for supply chains. And you also see concentration in agricultural inputs. Now, if you look at fertilizers, 5 countries may represent 60, 70% of all the fertilizers traded in the world. So issue related to labor. No, so finding labor was difficult pre-COVID for the agri sector, and now you add to that immigration, work permit, travel restrictions, the requirement for social distancing. So everything is affecting the availability and the cost of labor, which may mean that labor shortages may be exacerbated. Move to the next slide. So what are we seeing in agri-food supply chains? No, as I said earlier, we're likely to see permanent changes in the sector. No, or more precisely, I think we're likely to see acceleration of pre-COVID trends. No, and a fast acceleration in the pre-COVID trend. So something alternative proteins. No, I think we are seeing it, and we will grow at a much faster rate than they were growing up until now. So consumer concerns about environmental footprint, and health impact of a diet which may be rich in meat, the labor intensity of the sector, no issues related to animal welfare, use of antibiotics, of hormones, so all are likely to accelerate this moving to alternative animal proteins, and by the way, also not just meat, but also on the milk side. Indoor and vertical farming, so in warehouses or containers near cities, so they do not depend on sun or rain, so it's high-tech indoor agriculture, basically, clearly at a relatively high cost so far, but it is growing food next to the consumer, which is less labor intensive. And for some consumers, it meets sort of the branding criteria of being fresh and being local. At the individual level, actually, it's interesting to see also that increased demand for urban agriculture. People are just planting more cucumbers, eggplants, tomatoes in their backyards. We're seeing more food protectionism. Governments are striving for self-sufficiency, what some people are calling food nationalism. So, which is affecting global supply chains and traditional commercial ties. Countries are limiting or restricting the export of certain foods and basic products, and or subsidizing local producers. So it's and also, by the way, also competing for market share. So in summary, this is we're seeing a deglobalization of some of the supply chains on the agri side. Singapore has adopted a 30-30 so-called 30-30 strategy. 30% of the food by the year 2030 will have to be domestically produced. Government regulations, again, more accommodating and probably more supportive of policies which are fostering domestic players and domestic production. As I mentioned earlier, also increased demand for healthy foods. So nutraceuticals, food that claim to have medical benefits. So as I said, the growth in demand for fresh food, vegetables, sort of the concept of clean, healthy, hygienic, contactless, everything has to do with wellness will sell. And demand for products which are sustainable, that meet the climate change conscious agenda. So this is becoming now not just a sort of good to have, it's not an option anymore. So it's more of an obligation. So it's a necessary ingredient if you want to compete in the marketplace. So what does all this mean for agri-future, for the future of agri and food? So we need more resilient food supply systems. So there is or has been perhaps a slight delay in adopting technological innovation. We'll hear more from the panel. But there is an opportunity and a good opportunity to catch up. So innovation can address many of the challenges that we're facing. If we go to the almost the last slide, what are the innovation opportunities? So alternative meats, anything that plant-based, cellular proteins, algae, indoor agri, so anything automation all the way from planting to delivery. So artificial intelligence to continuously improve the efficiency and the response to what plants needs in real time. We mentioned labor shortages, so labor substitutes such as sensors, drones, robotics. For from the food distribution side of delivery system, food packaging innovation, so perhaps continue to strive for less packaging, for recyclable, for plant-based material, anything that extends shelf life. In addition, traceability and becoming even more important. Traceability and disease control will matter probably even more on the whole process from farm to fork. And finally, sort of digitization of agriculture, increased use of artificial intelligence, less labor, less agriculture inputs for unit of production, faster responses to pests and disease. So precision agriculture, basically anything that will minimize the use of water, fertilizers, and agrochemicals. So in summary, I think we're seeing, on the last slide, we're seeing a severe recession with long-lasting impact. It is a pending traditional consumer behavior, and the last slide, and then leading to innovation opportunities. So with this, I'm finished. I just wanted to thank you for the attention and pass it back to our moderator. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Oscar, for setting the stage. And what we want to do is unpack some of those challenges and opportunities, but also look globally at what are the opportunities and what this looks like in different contexts. And for that, you know what, Camila, I'm going to start with you to see what this means for Latin America and the Caribbean regions. What are the challenges here? What are the flavor of the challenges in the region? And perhaps maybe looking at this as the opportunity.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Daniela. Just to give you a little bit of background of where actually I'm coming from and from what perspective I will be speaking. I'm part of the investment team of O2LAC Latam, which is a venture capital firm that invests especially in the agri-food tech sector. So we look at early stage companies, innovations, technologies applied to some part to the agri-food value chain. And we help those companies grow into becoming globally impactful. We are part of a network of other venture capital firms that specialize in this sector. So basically we run the Latin American operation. And from that view is that we have been traveling across Latin America. We have been looking at the challenges that the region has and the innovations that entrepreneurs and startup companies are developing from our part of the world, always looking into how they can impact on a global scale, and actually also engaging with farmers from different parts of Latin America, understanding their challenges and their problems, their pains. And our take on all of this and in the face of COVID, I think we have an opportunity to start fresh, and there's this opportunity require us to connect in Latin America to what we can do best, to the positive situation, the positive aspects that Latin America has as a food producing region, right? So actually most of the countries that are part of Latin America and the Caribbean have some sort of relevance in terms of a number of different crops, fruits, or plants, or raw materials that are produced from those hubs. So we do have, I mean, as Oscar was mentioning before, there's a huge concentration of where food comes from to the rest of the world. And Latin America has a very important role in producing some of the most consumed goods, food productions in the whole, in our planet. So we need to take advantage of the opportunity and the relevance that we have in this sector to impact the global supply chain. So this is something positive that we need to connect to. We have the ability to move the market, to make a dent in that sense, and having the chance of thinking this post-COVID situation to start new, to how we need to rebuild our global food chain, supply chain, to make it more sustainable, more resilient. Definitely Latin America has an important role to play in making the first move to define this new roadmap that we want to carry on. So again, Latin America, it's a region where we had lots of almost 30% of the fresh water in the world, huge diversity of crops, huge relevance in terms of many countries being top 5 in most of the most consumed foods. We have great innovations, great startups that are developing solutions that are very well adapted to diverse region that, as we have here in Latin America, where not necessarily infrastructure always is up to date. So most startups and companies are very well adapted. So again, we have the market relevance in the sector. We have the innovation, we have the startups, and we definitely are in a very well-suited position to make a move and start impacting, defining this road ahead in terms of where we need to build a new food system that we want.
Thank you very much. And I want to dive down a little deeper and perhaps try to get another perspective on this challenge or opportunity, or basically been the opportunity to leapfrog in places where infrastructure hasn't really been there historically. And with that, Simon, I want to move to you. As Syngenta Foundation for Sustainable Agriculture has been very active in India and Africa, with markets that are actually have smaller players. This is a different than the resilience that Oscar has portrayed. So I'm interested to hear your take on the challenges we're seeing and how they affect the farmers.
Sure. Thanks, Daniela. Greetings, everyone. So I think if we look at the way the crisis has been playing out in South Asia and in Africa, what we're seeing is some slight differences on what Oscar was talking about. So I would say that some of the supply chains have been disrupted, particularly those that rely on air transportation. So in East Africa, for example, there's lots of fresh vegetables and flowers that get exported to Europe, and we've seen significant shutdowns in those sectors, which has led to significant challenges for the businesses and unemployment and so on. And again, as Oscar was saying, we don't really know what the bounce back pattern is going to be yet. And more in the local markets, what we're seeing is, again, that there has been some significant slowdown, let's say, in cross-border transportation and long tailbacks at borders, as perhaps the two governments on either side of some of the borders are not exactly aligned on how to treat the crisis and how to allow goods to move, and so on. What this has led to has been increasing uncertainty then in what's happening in the food markets. And this has been added to, I would say, by the fact that a lot of consumers are low-income people who are employed casually, not just in agriculture, but in many other sectors. And again, because of the economic slowdown, a lot of these people have been laid off, or micro entrepreneurs have had trouble, keeping their businesses going, and so on. And all of this has then led to slowdown in demand and lower predictability in terms of demand for food and agricultural products. So that means then that farmers have been facing increasing uncertainty about whether they should be planting for the next season, and in some cases have been deciding not to, because they're not sure if they can sell their produce. So there has been, I would say, overall, an increase in risk, an increase in uncertainty, a reduction in business fortunes, and so on. This has led to then backups in terms of things like liquidity for small and medium enterprises and for farming. And there's a lot of organizations now trying to tackle these liquidity challenges. But at the moment, there's I think, potentially still a looming crisis ahead if there are substantial chunks of these countries where people hold back from planting or hold back from using improved technologies and improved inputs because they can't afford them. And that could still produce more challenges in terms of future food supply than we've seen to date. And overall, I agree with Oscar's relatively positive assessment in terms of the current situation. So risks ahead. On the opportunity side, fully agree with Oscar that the digitization and attention to digital opportunities and the acceleration around that has been a big boost. Our foundation is very focused on those smallholders who are not yet regularly participating profitably in market systems and not regularly able to use improved technologies. And this digitization and the support for more precision application of inputs, lower intensity but higher benefit, and so on, is definitely something that we're looking at, as well as things like integrating and bundling digital services together to support, for example, the training of rural-based entrepreneurs as well as small-scale farmers, and linking them to then digital financial services, including not just credit, but also things like insurance and savings, and integrating more easily into supply chains. So I think there's some very good opportunities there, and some response already being seen by policymakers and businesses in East Africa. We have seen the integration of mobile network operators agreeing to share USSD codes. This sounds a bit technical, but what it basically means is that if you want to communicate with entire populations now who have the traditional style, let's say mobile phones, the feature phones rather than smartphones, you can now do it, or shortly we'll be able to do it using common codes, which hasn't been possible. That's been inhibited because each mobile network operator has wanted to offer their own services to their own customers only. And then just quickly to touch on a couple of the other things that Oscar mentioned, where I think there are opportunities, but some challenges. I think in Africa and Asia, I think this move to alternative proteins is global. It's going slower, perhaps, in those markets than in more advanced countries, but it is happening. And I think, again, if there's good planning and good foresight, for the plant-based proteins, this can actually present an opportunity for farmers. I think the indoor farming certainly, and the vertical farming and so on, presents an opportunity for job creation and entrepreneurship within massive cities like Lagos and Nairobi and so on, but it potentially has challenges in the rural areas because if the demand for further flung imports is reduced because there's more local production, that has some countervailing challenges. And the same, I think, is true in terms of some of the labor issues. We still have this very significant challenge about who's going to do the farming in the future, especially in low-income rural areas where the lives of small-scale farmers is not the most attractive and young people don't want to stay. And so it's not just a labor shortage issue, it's also a farmer shortage issue. But this could, if it's managed sensibly by governments agreeing with their local civil society and private sectors to modernize their agriculture sectors, support consolidation and modernization and so on, be addressed. But this is not something that is readily in view right now. Thanks, Daniela.
Thank you, Simon. That's extremely interesting. And again, I mean, there are challenges ahead, and it's clear that we are only, unfortunately, in the middle of this, if not still at the beginning. But how this will play out, and I want to bring it back to Latin America for a second for our conversation, and we'll be jumping around globally for this conversation throughout. And I want to invite you, Esteban, the shortage of farmers, the challenges for farming, the supply chain issues. I'm interested to hear how you've been seeing the challenges in Costa Rica and in your activity in the region at large.
Okay, hi everybody from Latin America. I am Esteban Cibaja from Costa Rica. So I am very known about all the situation that is in Latin America. I have been working a lot in all Latin America, from Mexico to Colombia. And we already understand what are the sufferings, what are the barriers, and it's really important first to understand this. What are the barriers and risks that we are suffering in Latin America right now? So first of all, I think that telecommunication infrastructure is a really is developed in a really poor way in our area. It is important to understand that if you're going to apply technology to these rural areas, you need telecommunications. I mean, it's impossible to develop any kind of technology if you doesn't have the reach from internet, if you doesn't have the reach from some services, some basic services such as electricity. So it is important that we need to understand that we cannot address the people and tell them, okay, you need to apply technology in order to overcome all the things that has been happening with COVID right now. So first of all, it is important to make everyone conscious that we need to apply technology, but also we need to develop our communication and ways of distribute your products by local distributors in the cities. So we can take all the produce from the rural areas to the cities without counting with big corporations, because this is going to take a big amount of your profits. And also you're going to be always risking of getting contact with people and getting COVID. And this is, as Camila said, this is a time for opportunities. And as Camila and Oscar said, these are times for opportunities, and the people who is going to look for the barriers that we have right now and turn them into opportunities. This is the people that is going to go up in these problems right now. I can tell you about the experience that we have right now here in Costa Rica. So I'm going to share with you just a little bit of the slides that I have. And as you can see here, right now we are developing and we are sharing with our producers technologies regarding the technical support related to small producers. We are helping them with their irrigation activities. We are helping them with how to distribute their products, helping them with e-commerce. This is really important to do for the small producers. They need to start understanding what e-commerce is, how could they sell their products on Facebook, by WhatsApp. This is how, in a really humble way, a small producer are going to overcome and be resilient in the near future, because right now we are having a really bad situation here in Costa Rica, and I think that in all Latin America. So it is important to start looking for technology. Fortunately, our directors long time ago, like 2 years ago, saw that all the producers in Costa Rica, small producers, had to evolve. So we brought technology in order to help them to have control of their products, even though if they are not in the field. So as you can see here in the picture, we are installing sensors in irrigation systems in their crops, so we can have a remote control of what are they doing, how are the products, or how are the fertilizers in their soil, how is the humidity content in their soils, and we don't have to be there. Everything can be done by the computer, on their cell phone. This technology it doesn't need to have a specific telecommunication infrastructure. We just can handle it by satellite communication. So solutions as this one are the ones that are going to help all the producers a lot, because we are already brought the technology from Israel to our area, and it's working perfectly in times of COVID. So these are the ways that I think are the most important in order to help the small producers. Telecommunications, of course, this is a huge barrier, but we already find a way to to solve it by WhatsApp, by Facebook, selling on Facebook, looking to standardize and construct your own distribution logistic, and also for the small producer, all the support in a remote way. This is really important too. And I think these are the ways that the small producers could eventually go further in this situation right now.
Thank you so much, Esteban. And this is a perfect way to talk about the acceleration of adoption of technology. So you've been investing in this. These are trends that, as Oscar said, and you've mentioned, you've been identifying them in advance. And Camila, I'm sure that's true in your capacity as well as an investor in technologies. But I'm going to bring it back to you, Camila, for a moment and ask you about this acceleration that you're seeing on the ground of tech adoption, of the openness for this. Floor is yours.
Thank you. Yeah, actually, as Oscar was presenting, giving the overview, I just keep nodding because, yeah, I mean, there was actually a previous trend, many previous trends going on before COVID started. And for us, I mean, I know this is a sensible subject, but in AgTech, COVID was something extremely positive. I'm going to say that again, it's a very sensible subject, but it accelerated trends that we would expect to see probably 5 years from now. So things have been very exciting in the past few months. Again, it's a very sensible subject because we are all struggling. I mean, I've been in quarantine for I don't know how many days now, but farmers have been adopting technology, digitizing their productions, their fields, their activities. They have been requiring someone to do the work because, again, labor shortages, because workers are quarantined and you have to keep the social distancing thing. So all of these have actually been accelerating the adoption of specifically digital technologies. We have a portfolio of 9 companies. From those 9 companies, 7 are developing digital technologies. And we have been seeing that the scalability that was lacking in AgTech startups, it's really coming together. For example, many of our startups have been able to do remote deploying of their technologies, doing pilots from Argentina to Mexico, from Chile to Colombia, things that before we thought it was impossible because you need to take, I mean, the logic of selling to a farmer was actually getting into a plane, travel to the field, have many conversations with the farmer, trying to convince them that the technology would actually help him make the whole production of their crop or their animal will be much more traceable, will open them many other possibilities of decommoditizing what they have been producing for so many years, the ability to control it remotely, make it more efficient, more sustainable in some cases. So I have just to emphasize the point, it's a cute anecdote. One of our companies shared an email with me of a farmer in the south of Chile that was attending a webinar that they do to actually explain some of the concepts of the technology to make it more accessible for that type of farmers. And this farmer was the first time in his life that was downloading the Zoom application to actually jump into a webinar. And that was, again, the barrier of the resistance, the barrier to incorporate and adopt digital technologies was down the minute that farmer in the south of Chile download the application to actually participate with many other farmers in a webinar about how to monitor the irrigation of the production that he did. So again, it's very exciting times for AgTech. Startups are developing a very interesting capability to scale fast, as fast as any other digital company, and finally growers and farmers all over Latin America are actually valuing the possibility to access this type of technologies and to help them produce better crops.
Wow, what a story. But it just explains we're all kind of from our homes, from our offices, dealing with this remote work, and it's changed all of our lives, and it has made distance irrelevant. And with this, I would like to invite you, Shmuel, to talk a little bit about the opportunity, how Israel plays into this. We are definitely not an agriculture supply or powerhouse of any kind, but the technology, I think, is the story. Shmuel?
Hi, yes. Well, first of all, I have to thank Camila especially, and also Esteban, because I love when my hypotheses are confirmed. I was suspecting that one outcome of the pandemic would be to kind of push users of agricultural and food technologies to kind of get past the normal hesitations that usually impede the adoption of technologies. I wish it were under better circumstances for sure, but at least this is turning out well for the innovators, and hopefully also serving our our food suppliers. To answer Daniela's question, I'll share a slide with you guys. Just a moment. I didn't warn Daniela about this slide, but I think it's okay. She had mentioned that Israel is not a major supplier or grower of food in the world, and you can see the green dots here represent the top 10. There are others that are also major suppliers, like Australia, elsewhere throughout the world, Argentina. But these are the top 10, and you can see the innovation hubs of agri-tech and food tech marked in yellow. And for the most part, the innovation hubs are close to the major producers of foods. There are a few exceptions. Don't be distracted by Australia. It's not true. They have a lot of, they grow a lot of food. But Israel is really an exception in this regard. We're a tiny country, and we don't have a ton of agriculture, though we are an agricultural nation. We grow a lot of food for ourselves and export it even. But we're really an agricultural technology supplier. So the kinds of technologies that are most relevant right now that Israel can be supplying, on one hand, it's really all of the technologies that were being developed prior to the pandemic, because the problems that those technologies were addressing did not go away. Okay, so there were always pests, and there was always issues of water usage and trying to increase yield, all kinds of things like that. And those issues are still around. If you go to, for example, Africa, or really anywhere in the Indian subcontinent and in Asia at this point, you ask, how they're dealing with the fall armyworm, for example, they probably still use some solutions for that problem. Or in Africa with the locust plague, for example. So these technologies are still super relevant. Just obviously right now there are technologies that are sort of more pressing, because the one thing that we need to do with our agri-food supply chain is what Oscar had described before, which is ensure its resilience. So there are new threats that have developed because of COVID. In particular, in my opinion, the threat to labor is one of the largest ones. That was always a problem before the pandemic. Obviously with urbanization, which everybody's familiar with, the world increasingly urbanizing and labor becoming more and more scarce for agriculture, there was a need to factor in some automation if we're going to continue supplying enough food. And now with quarantines and restrictions to travel, these kinds of technologies are all the more relevant. So for example, the technologies that are dealing with mechanization, that help connect farmers, like what Esteban had described with CropX, which is actually one of the Israeli companies that is doing the best, installing sensors and creating a digitization of agriculture. These are the technologies that can make the industry more relevant. And so those are the ones that are especially interesting right now. But we have a sector that's rather diverse and can tend to really many of the challenges that Oscar had pointed out. So mechanization, especially digitization, where we have a lot of technology there, and those have the greatest opportunity, as well as alternative foods, things like that.
Thank you. Thank you, Shmuel. I want to go, I'm going to ask you guys to shorten the answers a little bit so we managed to get as many questions also from the audience. But Esteban, I do want to hear, you mentioned CropX and your experience in bringing technologies already in advance. And I'm interested to hear kind of your experience of actually being able to identify solutions relevant.
Sure. Just before starting with this, I just saw a comment in the chat of someone that said that the costs of labor in Latin America are very high. Okay, this is something really important to pay attention. Why? Because this is why technology is helping us in order to save in all kinds of let's say labor, let's say water, let's say diesel or gas for pumping the irrigation systems. This is why we are trying to implement technology. And okay, in order to talk now about CropX, that is one of the brands that we are working with, I'm going to show you just an example of how technology can help us to save money in labor and in any other kind of agronomic product, such as fertilizer, such as whatever you want, because with this technology, the one that I'm sharing with you right now, you can see the small sensor right there, the blue one. That sensor from CropX is installed inside the soil, and it's always sensing the humidity content of the soil. So what does that is going to produce? That is going to produce in you that you are going to have peace of mind, that everything is going to be okay in your field, and you can check it right in your phone. Right in your phone, you can check if you have enough water in your field. You can check if you have enough fertilizer in your field. You are always going to have different kinds of information, such as climate, weather. You're going to get satellite imaging, and it's really important to understand from where does this product came from. Israel. Israel is a small country that all Latin Americans should put our focus on. Why? Because they specialize in really quality, high quality products, different, very different, and it's pretty much the same scale as Latin American producers. You go to Israel and you see a small farms of not more than 10 to 20 hectares, correct me if I'm wrong, but are really small farms, such as the ones that we have here in Costa Rica. They don't have water. They don't have water, and we have plenty of water. How is it possible that we are not taking as much and as many quality as them? This is not possible. Why? Because we haven't wanted before to put our concentration in technology in our production systems, and this is the biggest problem that we have in our country right now. It is important to understand something else about Israel. In Israel, there's a really interesting thing happening there, and that's how all this amazing technology is coming out. In Israel, the public education is very, very close to the government and also to the private sector. So with these three bases, they are like working together and taking out a really good technology applicable to small farmers. And this is why we should start looking in Israel for this kind of technology, because it fits perfectly for us. We wanted to produce rice in Costa Rica, such as Brazil and such as United States and Australia, because they are the biggest producers in the world. but now we cannot compete with them. As the person in the chat was telling us, our labor costs are really high. Okay, so don't produce that kind of rice, produce another one, a highest quality, a different one, or produce something else in a small scale, because we cannot fight against them. Look at the coffee production in Costa Rica. Look at the coffee production in Costa Rica. We are working with something like 35 to 45% of slope in coffee. So we cannot have a big machinery such as Brazil. But even though we are getting the best quality of the coffee in the world, I'm not going to say that it's the best, but it is something amazing, the quality that we have of coffee in Costa Rica. And these are the types of production that we should be focusing on, related with this kind of technology. Because what am I going to do with an automatic pilot in coffee farms? Nothing. That kind of technology is not going to work with us. But this kind of technology, such as Cropex, is just one sensor that, whereas it's a really small amount, something like $60 to $70, you could have it on your field, work for everybody from 1 hectare producer to 100 hectare producers. And you're going to get a lot of information from the soil, from the sky, with satellite imaging, with weather, climate weather, and everything is going to be working in the platform to give you really good solutions. And another technology that I want to share here.
Esteban, sorry, I'm gonna have to cut you a little bit short because we want to continue.
Yes.
So you know, you mentioned the complementarities or the similarities even between agriculture in Israel, and we may come back to this solution and in Costa Rica, or things that you're seeing, but I want to kind of refer to Simon because, you know, Israel agriculture is very different from what we're seeing in Africa or in India, and yet we see those partnerships being developed. Esteban, can I ask you to stop sharing your screen for a moment? And it's a completely different context, and yet still the partnerships continue. So Simon, I would love to hear your experience. And again, I ask you to keep it a little short.
Sure, thank you. So I am, like Esteban, a great fan of Israeli technology for all the reasons he alluded to. What we're finding, however, is that the Israeli entrepreneurs typically are aiming their technologies at, let's say, more commercial farmers in more advanced markets. But actually, we think that many of these technologies, not all of them, but many of them, with some adaptation and some localization, can be extremely useful to the farmers that we're concerned about, the low-income smallholders in Asia and in Africa. So we've got a partnership now where we're working with Startup Nation Central and a number of Israeli entrepreneurs, and we're, if you like, the receiving end of the bridge, and helping to get those technologies trialed with local farmers through local run centers of excellence in the farmers' fields, and then working with local enterprises and local entrepreneurs to figure out the delivery models for those technologies. And I'll just, I won't go through all of them by any means, but I'll just highlight a couple of the different types of technologies that we've been working with. One is a mycorrhiza technology that's really good for improving soil health, run by an Israeli company called Groundworks Bioag. That's already shown great results in India, and we're now going to be testing it in Africa as well. We've been working with Salog, which is a phone-based pest and disease detection tool that can be a great guide, not just for individual farmers, but also for entrepreneurs working with groups of farmers or cooperatives and so on, as to what kinds of issues are going on with their plants and how to deal with those issues. We've been working with a group called Talia that has very innovative mulching trays. Sounds like it's a really simple technology, but really, really well designed, proving really well in India. And we're going to be testing it in Africa. And the list goes on. There's a lot of drip irrigation type solutions, as you might imagine, and a lot of digital solutions as well. But I wanted to give you some examples of, which were not particularly either of those, just to show the broad array of technologies. But the most important thing is that seamless handover that happens where you have the entrepreneurs not just going off and trying to scout out and find opportunities by themselves, but having the receiving end of the bridge with organizations on the ground that can then help with that adaptation and the business model development, local sourcing of finance and other things that those technologies then need to really be deployed and then scaled up. And then what we're doing is also to help develop those scalable networks, let's say, of rural entrepreneurs and rural farmers organizations and so on, that can be the receiving side for those technologies. So it's a system type approach rather than just a point solution or entrepreneur centric approach that I think is probably what I want to leave you with.
Thank you so much, Simon. And I see we're running a little bit late, so I do want to first of all invite all the everyone who's joined us in this fascinating session to go to the booth. You can find the wide range of technologies and opportunities, and you can reach out to us if you've found any of this interesting, if you'd like to learn more, if you'd like to be in touch with any of the panelists. And what I'd like to do is bring in one or two questions from the audience. Before we finish, Shmuel, I'll ask you to finish at the end, just to give us a taste of the range of technologies and the adaptation. So I have a question, I'm going to throw it out here, and I invite you guys to just jump in. If the pandemic extends another 6 to 12 months, will there be an increase in food prices? If so, what kind of foods do you think it'll be wide or specific? Simon, would you like to take a crack at it since you're still in front of me?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it builds on what I was saying before about this issue about uncertainty around the next sort of seasons and next harvests and so on. And if we don't address those uncertainties and there's a holdback on production because farmers are very unsure about the markets or they're unable to source finance, then I think we will have some food price spikes coming. And I think that's going to be more a hyper-local type of issue, frankly, than a big, intercontinental issue, because the big grains, I think, there's plenty stored. There's been, at least so far, a holdback from the kinds of trade barriers, export bans and things like that we saw 12 years ago in the last major food price hike. But I think in some of these local markets, we are going to see shortages and then a difficulty to respond. So I think it's going to be in products like fruits and vegetables and maybe small livestock and things like that, where these kinds of issues are going to happen more than the big commodity crops. Thanks.
Thank you. And I'm going to raise another question here. Latin America is a strong coffee producer. I have to admit, Colombian coffee at home, but I apologize. But there is a question here from the audience about coffee consumption in Europe and which of the export countries have been most affected by this COVID pandemic, specifically around coffee. And with that, Oscar, I'm going to try you out for this question.
That's a tough question. I don't think there's been any specific country that's been more affected than others. So I wouldn't be able to see whether there's any major differentiation in terms of countries' ability to supply. I mean, air cargo has suffered, as Simon has mentioned, but the transport of coffee so far has not been impacted. I don't think there's any major disruption in any of the countries that are exporting coffee.
So our mornings are safe, at least in this side. Very happy to hear that. Lastly, Shmuel, I would like to ask you to kind of quickly give us a feel for the audience here on what kind of technologies, what kind of opportunities for partnerships exist, both for the Latin American region and Israel in partnership, and perhaps in a more global perspective, we have a wider audience.
Sure. So first of all, I had mentioned before that our sector, it covers a swath of issues in the value chain. So we have companies that are targeting everything from inputs to the various cultivation issues on farms, in greenhouses, or for livestock. Not as much of an aquaculture scene, but we do have some innovation there. down to the supply chain issues, preservation, up to sorting, production, processing, things like that. So we have companies that are targeting all those different issues, and those are obviously relevant throughout the world and to different extents and in different ways to different kinds of countries or companies. One important aspect of the potential of those companies to actually make an impact in global markets is actually something that Simon had alluded to, which is, I don't know if he said this explicitly, but having strong, reliable local partnerships. This is something that Israeli companies are really needing. The Israeli companies are always facing outward. Like I mentioned before, we have a tiny agricultural market. It's good for doing some testing. It's not good for long-term business and growing as a company. What is good is targeting major markets throughout the world. And that's what pretty much the entire sector is doing. We're talking about almost 400 companies that are pointing outwards, targeting your agriculture sectors. I'm talking to everybody in this, conference. And what they need are opportunities, real opportunities to solve real problems, and strong local players that they can trust and that they can work with and that are going to help figure out how to adapt technologies to be most impactful for their local markets. And just to give you a sample of especially relevant technologies, we put together this map for everybody to stare at for a while. I believe we'll make it available online for free. But just to give you a sense, this is just a sample, okay? This is just a pick of a variety of companies that are very interesting, that are dealing with some of the major opportunities for technology in agriculture today during the pandemic. So mechanization, digitization, alternative foods and nutrition, and localization. There's a lot of overlap between these. It's really hard to split these up into hermetically sealed categories, but they do spread out like this, okay? And we have companies that are doing, using various technologies for crops, livestock. You can get a sense of the variety here when you have a closer look at the, at this slide. So I believe we'll share it with everybody to have a closer look.
Yes, thank you, Shmuel, very much. I want to be conscious of everyone's time, and we're running 2 minutes late, and I apologize for that. I do want to say thank you to Oscar, Simon, Esteban, Camila, and Shmuel for joining us today. And to all of you who are still with us, I see 496 people still tuned in and listening. Thank you so much. Go ahead and go to the O2LAC conference page. You can see the session. We'll be sharing materials there and in the booth online. And feel free to reach out to us with anything that you need or want or would like to hear more about. Thank you very much for.
Thank you.
Thank you.